Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. and I'm the host of Reformed GGA, and today I wanted to talk about this little thing right here. This is the Primary Arms 3X Prism Scope Gen 3. This is something that I got for a gun that is on the way for me. It hasn't arrived yet, which is rather annoying, but we're working on it. The accessories came before the gun did, which is very, very frustrating. But nonetheless, it gives me a chance to look over the accessories and talk to you guys a little bit about it, so I guess it's not all bad. But the reason why I went with this particular scope this time is because of an experience that I had with another Primary Arms product. And that is this one right here. This is very similar in that it is a prism scope by Primary Arms, and this one is their 2x version, so 2 times magnification instead of 3 times magnification. These are relatively new to the markets, and the big calling card of these ones is that they have a fairly long battery life, up to 20,000 hours. And so I got this scope for my AK, my Palmetto Strike Armory GF3 AK-47, and I got it because I wanted that long battery life. I wanted something with an illuminated reticle. I'll show you guys the illumination there. Something with an illuminated reticle that would stay on for a good long time. Something that I wouldn't have to worry about changing the battery, but maybe once a year or something like that. And this definitely fills the role. Gives me a little bit of magnification for the longer range shots. It is something that works well with my eyes because I have pretty bad astigmatism, and so it's good for that. Has good long battery life. The magnification isn't so high that it gets in the way of doing close quarter things. It's still manageable. A good compromise scope. But one thing that always annoyed me about this one, and has been annoying me for all the time that I've owned it, is that reticle, even though it's very bright when it's illuminated, or at least can be if you turn it up sufficiently high, is that it is a fairly small reticle that is fairly hard to properly resolve. It's not impossible, but it's not exactly convenient. It's not exactly easy. Like I said, I needed something that could be always on. My problem is that when I take off my glasses, I can't make out fine details very well, especially with open sights and even ones that have etched reticles like these Prism scopes do. These Prism sights do have etched reticles that are technically visible even when the illumination isn't on. But if my glasses are in, I can't see that reticle. It turns into just a gray smudge. So I need that illumination. I need to be able to see a red smudge that stands out against whatever I might be pointing the gun at. So for a home defense gun and something that I might be using at night when I don't have my glasses on, something that I'm still going to have a useful aiming point with is kind of a big deal. So that's why I went with that one. But for a non-bedside gun, something that is more recreational in nature, frankly, I wanted something that was a little bit easier on the eyes in terms of being able to see that reticle and make it out real well. And that's where the 3X comes in. A lot of the basic features are the same in that it's a prism scope. It's relatively compact, just for comparison here. Here is an old high power variable optic that I had. This is a Vortex 4x12x40, not anything super great, but just looking at the size comparison, yeah, this one gives you magnification in a much smaller package. Now, the Vortex does give you a lot more options, if you will, and certainly higher magnification, all the way up to 12x, but frankly, when I did use this on rifles, I don't really use it on rifles anymore, but when I did use it on rifles, I never went all the way up to 12x, just because most of the stuff that I shot was relatively close, 100-200 yards, maybe 300 yards. Didn't really need the level of magnification that it offered, but I do like having some magnification. So this was a little bit overkill, and of course it has all the twisty knobs and doodads and all that kind of stuff, the parallax, diopter, magnifier rings, and all those kinds of things, all kinds of little doodads that you can mess with that I usually didn't wind up messing with. I'd find one setting that I happened to like for that gun, and if it was a plinking gun, not a bedside gun, or even a multi-role gun, it was just kind of one gun that did one thing, usually find one particular place that I liked everything and usually just leave it there. So all the variableness of the variable optic was generally lost on me. Not that it isn't useful for some people. There's lots of people I know that use variable optics, either low power or high power, to very good effect. And for what they do, it makes sense for them to have them. But for me, I usually just go out and plink, and I like to have a little bit of magnification. But like I said, once I find a spot with a variable optic that I like, I usually leave it there, and so it's not variable anymore. So it doesn't make sense to really get a variable optic if you're just going to leave it in one position all the time. So for me, this next gun that I plan on getting is more or less going to be a plinking gun. I'm not super worried about home defense, and so I'm not worried about having an illuminated reticle that will stay on all year for me. Well, technically this is a shake awake, so it basically turns itself off when it's not in use, and that's what allows the battery to last as long as it does. I'm not super concerned about that for a plinking gun though, so I figured the primary arms 3X would be a better option. For one, the reticle that is inside, let's see if I can show you guys that, is considerably larger than the other one. I mean, just see if I can get both of these in the shot here. Yeah. I mean, noticeably larger. I mean, obviously noticeably larger. So yeah. Okay, so there's that one. Try to get that one in there. Trying to get both of these lined up at the same time. The screen is a little hard. Sorry about that, but very obviously larger reticle. And it doesn't have the same battery life. It's a max 3 hours an hour battery life, which is still really long for a lot of illuminated optics, especially higher power ones. And it's not very high power. It's 3X. It's not high power by any real standards. But when you're talking about a magnified optic that has illumination, 3,000 hours is still a pretty good long time. It's just not long enough to leave it running all year. But like I said, if it's not a bedside gun, if you don't have to have it ready all the time, you know, something else is just, something like this is perfectly adequate. Another thing about this that is nice versus the 2X model is the 2X model, partially because it's new and also partially because the battery lasts so long in it, is it's about $100 more than the 3X is. So if I don't need the super long battery life, I get a much larger reticle, more magnification, in a package that is still very workable. It's not as big and bulky as the variable optics. Now, granted, not all variable optics are as big as this one. A lot of the low power variable optics are not too bad, but still, they usually take up quite a bit of space, bit of rail space. This one, not as much. Not as much magnification, but it doesn't take up as much space either. Also, these primary arms 3X Prism scopes have gotten a reputation for being super durable, and frankly, I tend to be a little hard on stuff. I've managed to break almost every single handgun that I've owned, for example. Usually the firing pin is what I wind up breaking, sometimes the return trigger spring as well, maybe another doodad here and there, but I almost always manage to break my handguns. Rifles, I don't tend to break nearly as much, but I still have issues with them from time to time, and I'm just hard on things. And so something that is relatively low cost, easy to replace, and not going to care about it too much if it does happen to get damaged, but can still take a beating, appealed to me. And I've seen videos where people have taken these things and they've submerged them in water for days, months on end, or they've frozen them and then got them out by bashing the ice-encrusted optic with a hammer, and in one case with a shotgun blast of birdshot. I wouldn't suggest that you try that. Now, at a certain distance and with a small enough size of shot, yeah, that can be a viable way of doing things, but if you go big enough shot or you go close enough with a shotgun, you're not going to have much of an optic left. But it was still a cool demonstration. People have put these things through the ringer, and they're pretty durable. Everything has limits, but for the most part, they come out pretty okay. And so, like I said, for something that's basically recreational, and something that I'm probably going to use pretty hard, and something I don't want to invest too much money in, because if it breaks, which I have a habit of doing, I don't want to be out too much money, makes a lot of sense. And also, these ones are nice, like all, well, pretty much all Prism scopes, every single one that I've dealt with. you can see in there, it's a little hard to pick it up, but you can actually still make out the reticle even if the illumination is not on. And this one's big enough because it's the 3X, so it has the bigger reticle in there. You can make it out pretty well as long as you have a somewhat decent amount of ambient light. You can make it out without the illumination being on there because it's actually etched into the reticle itself. And that is pretty cool and useful. So it's a bigger reticle, a little easier for me to see. It's not going to go on a bedside gun, so the fact that the battery life isn't super high isn't as big of a deal. They're fairly rugged and reliable, a little bit more magnification for longer shots. For me, I think it will be a good fit. Will it be a good fit for you? Probably depends on your purposes. If you need precision shots, and especially you need precision at range, yeah, this is not going to cut it. If you're like me and you have a bedside gun, and especially if you can't see very well without your glasses on and you need some kind of illuminated reticle, something with a longer battery life is going to be a lot more practical. But for a relatively inexpensive, this was under $300, relatively inexpensive scope that has pretty good clarity. That's one of the nice things about Prism scopes, is they usually have pretty good clarity. Has pretty good clarity, relatively inexpensive, fairly durable, decent battery life, especially given the size and the price range that you're dealing with. All those kinds of things that might be worth looking into for you. So far, even though I don't have the gun to put it on, I'm pretty impressed with it. Just being able to look through it and very easily and quickly pick up the reticle is nice. And the eye relief on this thing is not too bad. Try to show you guys if I can here. But I would consider ideal eye relief to be about there for me. Of course, I wear glasses, and so that's going to mess with things a little bit. But yeah, that's about ideal eye relief. But the eye box is very forgiving. I can take the thing clear out to there, and I can still use the reticle. And then if I'm fairly close, I can still be pretty far off center and make use of it. It's not as good as a red dot or a holographic sight in terms of eye box, but it's pretty forgiving. It's much, much more forgiving than an HPVO or even an LPVO. And it's also more forgiving than some other types of Prism scopes that are out there. For example, ACOGs are generally Prism scopes, and they don't have a very forgiving eye relief or eye box, unfortunately. They're really great clarity, and there is no battery life to speak of because they're powered by the sun and by radiation. Not overly dangerous radiation, but technically radiation. So there's really cool features about ACOGs, but the eye relief and eye box in ACOGs is not one of them. This is actually better than an ACOG in that particular respect. Clarity, by comparison, well, yeah, if you're comparing it to an ACOG, no, it's not going to compare with that, but it is going to be substantially better than most of your variable optics out there, even ones that cost 2 or 3 times what this one does. That's one of the just nice things about Prism scopes, is they have really good glass clarity. Almost, I would say, edge to edge. Not quite. It's really hard to get a optic, especially this cheaply, that really goes quite to the edge in clarity, but this one gets pretty stinking close. So yeah, I understand why a lot of people have already invested in these and bought these. It has a full-size ACOG mount on it, and Primary Arms does send out the Picatinny adapter with it, and they did also send out the lens covers. One quick note for people who are wondering about the viability of using this as a close quarters sight, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It's not really what it's designed for, but it can be used as an occluded eyesight with the front lens cover down and the reticle on. You'll be looking through with one eye. If you're right eye dominant, you'll probably be using your right eye like I do, and the right eye will see the reticle, and you leave your left eye open. You don't try to squint or anything like that, or do the one eye closed thing. Leave both eyes open. One eye will pick up the target, the other eye will pick up the reticle. Your brain will automatically superimpose them on each other, and you'll be able to get effective shots at close range that way. It does eat battery, of course, when you do that, and like I said, it's a maximum 3,000 hour battery life. So as a always on, always ready kind of optic, I wouldn't suggest it, but if you needed to use it in a close quarter situation, you could do the occluded eyesight thing and it'd work in a pinch. It's definitely not an optimal sighting system, but it is technically viable. So it is viable in a close quarter situation, kind of useful for intermediates. The holdover marks on this one go all the way out to 600 yards. Not a bad set of features for what it is. It's not going to be able to compare with a high power variable optic or even a lot of low power variable optics, but it definitely doesn't take up a whole lot of rail space. Very forgiving eye relief and eye box compared to most of those kinds of scopes. Of course, offers more magnification than a standard red dot or holographic sight. Now on those you can put magnifiers behind them. This one kind of is the same thing built in. Because it has an etched reticle, you can use it without the illumination if you have enough ambient light, and if you're just doing the outdoor, plinking thing, you're generally going to have enough light for that. So for most people, as long as you don't need an at-the-ready kind of gun, this is not a terrible option. Just saying. If it fits that kind of purpose of use for you guys, you might think about looking into it. Of course, when I get the gun to put it on, I'll be able to say a little bit more, but so far I'm pretty impressed with it. It seems to be decently well built, good clarity, good eye box, eye relief. Reticle itself seems to be very clear. It's one of the ones that has the outer horseshoe and then inside is a little aiming chevron and then hash marks below that. Not too busy, fairly easy to pick up. Overall, not bad. That's my opinion so far. We'll see what happens when I finally am able to get it on a gun and really give it a thorough test. Thank you all for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to know the true Christ of history. Amen.